We've arrived at part 3 of our series looking at each year of Donald Trump's first term as president. 2019 is an interesting year because it was relatively light on substance. The administration really didn't do all that much. However, it's probably the most chaotic year of his presidency. This is the year that the Special Counsel investigation ends and impeachment begins. I'm sure you already know the drill by now, but this is the series where we look at what the Trump administration actually did in each year of Trump's first term to try to get a better sense of what the president's output has been going into this year's election. If you missed them, make sure to go back and watch episode 1 and 2. The first half of 2019 was dominated by the conclusion of the Special Counsel investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. Yep, 3 years after that election, and we were still trying to figure out what happened and who was involved with what. And like pretty much everything else to do with this administration, the release of the investigation's findings to the public was an absolute mess. In March, the Special Counsel concluded its investigation and sent its report to the Department of Justice, where it was received by Bill Barr, who had just been confirmed as the new Attorney General a month before, partly because of his public statements regarding his belief that the investigation itself was improper. Barr subsequently sent a letter to Congress summarizing his conclusions from the Special Counsel's report. This became known as the Barr Letter. Barr's letter states that the Special Counsel found 2 primary ways in which Russia interfered in the election. First, it deployed extensive disinformation campaigns on social media aimed at exacerbating divides among Americans. Second, Russia hacked Hillary Clinton's email and the Democratic Party, and strategically released emails in an attempt to hurt Clinton's chances in the election. The Special Counsel did not establish that the Trump campaign coordinated with Russia in these efforts. Barr also wrote that Mueller did not conclude that the president committed criminal obstruction of justice. He noted that Mueller did not exonerate him. However, Barr concluded that it was his own evaluation that there was not enough evidence in the report to justify prosecution for obstruction of justice. About a week after Barr's letter, the New York Times and the Washington Post reported that members of the Special Counsel thought that the letter was misleading. Whereas the president had used the letter to declare that Mueller's report provided Trump complete and total exoneration, the sources for the reports claimed that the counsel was split on whether or not there was sufficient evidence to recommend charges for obstruction, many of them believing that there was. At the very least, it was clear that the report wasn't as conclusive as Barr led us to believe. In April, the House Judiciary Committee subpoenaed the full report after the Justice Department failed to provide it by the April 2nd deadline. On April 18th, Barr released a redacted version of the report. The House Judiciary Committee then subpoenaed the full unredacted report, giving Barr a deadline of May 6th. Barr failed to meet this deadline. On May 8th, Trump invoked executive privilege over the report, which the House Judiciary Committee promptly voted to reject. They then voted to hold Barr in contempt. So we were in this weird situation where Trump and Barr insisted that the report cleared the president of any wrongdoing, but they were also refusing to let us see the report in full. However, the redacted version of the report still provided significant information. First, it did establish that Russia's interference efforts were illegal and happened at a large scale. It also established that the efforts were for the express purpose of helping Trump and hurting Clinton. Furthermore, the report established several links between the Russian government and the Trump campaign, and established that the Trump campaign expected to benefit from Russian interference. The report concluded that it was unable to establish a, quote, tacit or express agreement on Russian interference between the campaign and the Russian government, and that it had incomplete evidence due to encrypted, deleted, or unsaved communications, as well as false, incomplete, or declined testimony. So basically, they couldn't prove that the Trump campaign explicitly conspired with the Russian government to interfere in our election. However, the report could not conclude that such evidence didn't exist because of the obstruction into the investigation by the people being investigated, including the president. The president refused to meet with the Special Counsel, instead sending them written answers to some of their questions, which we later found out contained lies. So the Trump campaign knew about Russian interference, and they were linked to the Russian government. The public observed the campaign and the president himself push Russian disinformation, but the report was unable to establish an explicit conspiracy because the campaign lied to the Special Counsel, withheld evidence from the Special Counsel, and refused to cooperate with the Special Counsel investigation, which brings us to the second part of the report, obstruction of justice. The report details 10 instances when Trump was president and one while he was just a candidate, where where Trump may have obstructed justice. The report found private and public actions that Trump took to influence the investigations. However, the report found that his attempts failed mostly due to his subordinates refusing to carry out his requests. In the end, the special counsel's decision not to charge Trump or to recommend Trump be charged with obstruction came down to Mueller's interpretation of a DOJ Office of Legal Counsel memo that stated that the president cannot stand trial while in office. In fact, it wasn't that the special counsel had not found sufficient evidence to charge the president, as Barr's letter had suggested, but rather that the special counsel decided to take the option of charging or even accusing the president of any crimes off the table completely. It decided to leave that entirely to Congress. As I've said in past videos, we're still learning so much about this investigation, and it really does deserve its own video. So we'll come back to this later. However, the way the administration reacted and behaved during the closure of the investigation was too important not to mention when covering 2019. At the end of the day, the administration went to great lengths to obscure the report's findings and to make the president appear more innocent than he was. Simply put, they lied to us about what the investigation uncovered and the pattern of behavior that the report showed by the president to prevent law enforcement from doing their job. The controversy around the special counsel investigation was just dying down when, in July, on a call between Donald Trump and President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky, Trump asked Zelensky to open investigations into Joe Biden, who Trump thought he would eventually face in the upcoming election, as well as Biden's son, Hunter. Also, there was this investigation he wanted into a conspiracy theory about a DNC server that was involved in the special counsel investigation. He then put funds that Congress had allocated to aid Ukraine on hold until those requests were granted. He later released those funds without getting the investigations after he was alerted that his shenanigans were making their way to Congress. Don McGahn kind of warned him that all of this could get him into pretty serious trouble. This began a months-long inquiry into whether or not Donald Trump had requested that a foreign country help him in an election in exchange for funds that Congress had already approved. This inquiry would eventually result in Donald Trump's impeachment. This is another topic that requires its own video, but we'll try to do some cliff notes here. In September, a whistleblower complaint about the president became public. The complaint stated that the president was using the powers of his office to solicit foreign intervention into the US presidential election. This is obviously quite frowned upon. When the president uses the powers of his office to get reelected, the lines between democratically elected president and self-perpetuating dictator become way too blurry for most people to stomach. After the administration stonewalled attempts by Congress to learn more information about the events that led to the whistleblower complaint, the House opened a formal impeachment inquiry into the president. They basically did this as a tactic to try to force the president into actually giving up information so they can figure out what happened. What we learned, while not surprising, was very damning. In short, Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani had become convinced that Ukraine had helped Democrats frame Russia for the DNC hacks in the 2016 election. This was a popular conspiracy theory on the right, but it had no factual basis. It was actually pretty ridiculous. They had also become convinced that Hunter Biden had leveraged his father's position as vice president to benefit a Ukrainian energy company that he was on the board of. This also was a baseless accusation. While it certainly wasn't a great look that Hunter was on the board at all, there was no evidence that Hunter's position had influenced Joe while he was vice president. To the contrary, Joe Biden took actions as VP that were counter to the energy company's interests. Either way, what followed next was a complete shit show. Trump went through any and all lengths he could to stymie the investigation, including smearing the character and integrity of his own ambassadors. Trump's attempts at using this military aid to Ukraine to extort the president of Ukraine to open investigations into Trump's political opponents was well established in short order, with multiple people within the administration itself corroborating the acts of extortion. Articles of impeachment for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress were brought to the floor on December 18th and passed. Donald Trump was officially impeached. Unfortunately, Senate Republicans had no interest in holding Trump accountable for his actions. Trump was simply too popular with their base, and they universally thought it would be political suicide to appear as anything but absolutely defensive of the president. They, for all intents and purposes, became his legal defense. Instead of making any attempt at putting the president's actions on trial, they focused solely on the process by which House Democrats had brought the articles of impeachment against the president in the first place. See, the president had blocked a bunch of witnesses from testifying in front of the House that they had subpoenaed, and instead of going through a bunch of legal hurdles to try to compel those witnesses to testify, they just went ahead with the articles of impeachment anyway, because frankly, those testimonies weren't necessary to establish guilt. But Senate Republicans still objected on that basis. They said they didn't go through all of the proper processes before passing the articles. They basically just said it was a partisan impeachment. Either way, the Senate eventually acquitted him of the charges in February of the next year. There were some other notable acts by the administration outside of wanton abuses of power and obstruction of justice. On the foreign policy front, Trump made the controversial decision to abandon Kurdish allies in Syria, opting to keep only enough American troops in the area to secure oil fields. Turkey, who views the Kurds as their enemies, promptly invaded the territory and displaced over 130,000 Kurds. Keep in mind that Trump knew that this was going to happen if he pulled out. A power vacuum was left in the area that Russia promptly filled. Trump also spent much of 2019 realigning America on climate change and energy. In September, Trump repealed Obama's Clean Power Plan and replaced it with his Affordable Clean Energy Rule, which removed all caps on emissions. He also repealed the Clean Water Rule, which rolled back restrictions on dumping toxic chemicals into our water supply. He also opened the entire Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska to oil drilling, and he was the only leader at the G7 meetings not to attend climate discussions. This was in addition to the myriad of EPA rules and regulations against pollution that he has repealed. A study by Dr. David Cutler and Dr. Francesca Dominici found that Trump's climate and environmental policy could result in 80,000 excess deaths per decade, in addition to respiratory injury for over 1 million more. And then there's my favorite moment of 2019. It's this. Yeah, you almost forgot about Sharpie-gate, didn't you? In September, the Southeast got hit by Dorian, a Category 5 hurricane. And while he was listing all the states that were in Dorian's path, the president incorrectly included Alabama. Now, instead of just admitting the mistake and correcting it like a normal adult might, he got on national television and Sharpied a map to make it seem like he'd been right all along. This guy really is a piece of work. And that's 2019. This one was particularly difficult because the end of the Special Counsel investigation and the impeachment inquiry were two really big, complicated events. But otherwise, 2019 was pretty uneventful, especially from the standpoint of administrative achievements. Of the 3 years that we've covered so far, 2019 was definitely the president's least productive. But next week we have 2020, and we all know how much of a doozy that one has been. So make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss it. Also, go ahead and go back and watch the 2017 video and the 2018 video so that you're all caught up when 2020 drops. Also, if you wouldn't mind, share this video so more people can see it. It really helps out the channel. The times that I've had the most views on a video, it's always because somebody went out and shared it with their peers. And I'm really relying on y'all to do that. Also, I'm going to be giving a big facelift to the channel page soon, as well as launching a new website for the channel soon, so keep an eye out for both of those things. Again, thanks for watching. We'll see you next Sunday.